I'm Malinda Lo, author of Last Night at the Telegraph Club, a queer coming-of-age love story set in 1950s San Francisco. This is my sixth published novel, and with all of my previous books, I've usually celebrated the publication with an event at a bookstore. But due to the coronavirus pandemic, obviously, things are a little different this year. So I've decided to make this video and invite all of you to join me right here online to celebrate wherever you are. So pull up a chair or curl up on a sofa, grab a cup of tea or your beverage of choice, and let me tell you a little about Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Last Night at the Telegraph Club began as a short story called New Year that was published in the anthology All Out, the no longer secret stories of queer teens through the ages, edited by Sandra Mitchell. The story was inspired by two books that I read: The Rise of the Rocket Girls by Natalia Holt, about the women computers who worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab in the 1940s and 50s, and also by Wide Open Town, a history of queer San Francisco to 1965, by Nan Alamilla Boyd. These books are totally unrelated, but in my mind, they came together to create a character named Lily, a Chinese-American girl living in San Francisco's Chinatown in the 1950s. Lily is really inspired by her Aunt Judy, who works as a computer at JPL. Lily is fascinated by rocket science, but she's also beginning to realize that she might be a lesbian. So in Wide Open Town, I learned that there was a very active lesbian bar scene in the North Beach neighborhood of San Francisco in the 1950s. If you're familiar with the city, you will know that North Beach is basically right next to Chinatown. So I began to wonder, what would happen if Lily found out about those lesbian bars? She would probably want to go. The novel, like the short story, begins when Lily finds an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle for a nightclub where a male impersonator performs. So male impersonators have since become what we know as drag kings. But back then, they were sort of like Elvis impersonators. So they sang and performed on stage and in nightclubs. So it's 1954, and Lily is 17 years old, which means she doesn't have today's understanding of gender or sexual orientation, but she has an instinct. And she's very curious about this male impersonator and this nightclub. So she tears the ad out of the paper and she saves it. I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the book that takes place after Lily comes home with the ad and takes it to her room to look at it. It felt like hours before her father and brothers left the living room. When they were finally gone, Lily closed the pocket doors to her alcove and changed into her nightgown. She pulled out the newspaper ad and set it on top of the books that made her nightstand. She had folded it into a small square, but now it began to open of its own accord, parting like the wings of a butterfly. Startled, she watched it until it stopped moving. Outside, the cable car rumbled as it came up nearby Powell Street, and the bell seemed to clang in time with the beating of her heart. She began to unstack one of the piles of books beside her bed and pulled out Arthur C. Clarke's The Exploration of Space, which had been a gift from Aunt Judy. She laid the book on her bed, then pushed her pillow against the wall and sat back against it, reaching at last for the ad. She unfolded it carefully. There was Tommy Andrews, gazing into the distance like a movie star, a halo of light around Tommy's gleaming hair. Tommy Andrews, male impersonator. Some time ago, she had seen an advertisement for a show at a different nightclub that read, "Jerry Bouchard, world's foremost male impersonator." It had been accompanied by an illustration of a woman. Her curves were apparent, in a top hat and tails, with the curls of her hair poofing out beneath her hat. The illustration had seemed wrong, comical somehow. Not like this photo. Tommy was handsome, debonair. The photo wouldn't be out of place on Shirley's bedroom wall, alongside her pictures of Tab Hunter and Marlon Brando. Once, Lily had torn an illustration of a moon colony out of Popular Science magazine, which her father sometimes purchased for Eddie, her brother, and taped it on the wall above her bureau. When Shirley had seen it, she had teased her for having a boy's tastes, and after Shirley went home, Lily had taken it down. If she were exceptionally daring, she would cut away the words Tommy Andrews, male impersonator, from this ad, and pin up the picture in the space left by the moon colony. She doubted that anyone, even Shirley, would realize that the photo was not of a man, but she knew that she did not dare. She set the ad down on her bed and opened the exploration of space. Hidden between the pages were two other folded clippings. She had torn the first one out of an old Life magazine that had been left in a box outside the Chinese hospital. It depicted a young Katharine Hepburn lounging in a chair, legs casually draped over one of the arms. She wore wide-legged trousers and a blazer and held a cigarette in one hand while gazing off to her left. There was a knowing confidence in her expression, a hint of masculine attitude in her shoulders. Lily distinctly remembered coming across the photo while she was flipping through the magazine on the sidewalk. It had been September, and the sun had been bright on her head. She had stopped at the photo and stared at it until her hair began to burn from the heat, and then, before she could second-guess herself, she ripped it out of the magazine. Someone had been walking past at the time, and Lily saw them look at her in surprise. But by then it was too late, and she pretended as if she hadn't noticed their glance at all. She had quickly folded the page in two, slid it into her book bag, and dropped the magazine back in the box. The other clipping was an article about two former women Air Force Service pilots who had opened their own airfield after the war. It included a small photo of them sitting close to each other, looking up at the sky. They were dressed in matching sunglasses, collared shirts, and trousers, and the woman on the right, who had tousled short hair, protectively held the hand of the woman on the left. The short-haired woman worked as a mechanic. Her companion was a flight instructor. They weren't as dashing as Katharine Hepburn, but there was something compelling about their casual closeness. The article had come from an issue of the magazine Flying that Lily found at the public library last spring while researching a report on the wasps. She vividly remembered sneaking the magazine into the emptiest, farthest corner of the library and tearing the article out beneath the table as quietly as possible. She knew she shouldn't, but she had needed to have the picture in a way she didn't consciously understand. She'd surreptitiously left a nickel on the library's circulation desk, as if that might make up for her defacement of library property. Now, she laid the women pilots on the bed next to Katharine Hepburn and Tommy Andrews and looked at them all in succession. She couldn't put into words why she had gathered these photos together, but she could feel it in her bones, a hot and restless urge to look, and, by looking, to know. The images that Lily collects were inspired by real images that I found while researching this book. This is a page from a March 1955 issue of the San Francisco Chronicle, which features a nightclub review column called After Night Falls. It includes, you can see, a photo of someone called Mickey Mercer. In the column itself, it reads, quote, "Mickey Mercer, the male impersonator, is one of the big reasons that Club Shishi has become the popular spot on Broadway. Mickey gives you something different in nightclub entertainment," end quote. I found this article by searching the Chronicle archives for the term male impersonator. So nightclubs that featured both male and female impersonators, we know them as drag queens, frequently advertised in the newspaper. This is an ad for Finocchio's, a restaurant and nightclub that advertises the world's greatest female impersonators. This is a really large ad from the March 1948 issue of the Chronicle for Club 440, advertising Miss Jimmy Renard, America's foremost male impersonator. Club 440 was well known for its women who dressed as men, which is represented here by illustrations of women in tuxedos and top hats. There's also an illustration of a presumably straight couple, a man and a woman, dressed up for a night on the town, because these clubs advertised directly to mainstream society. None of these ads say that they're for gay clubs, but I think that sometimes we mistakenly believe that gay people were entirely hidden and closeted until very recently. But by the 1950s, San Francisco was already known as a gay mecca, and it had a reputation for being a bohemian hotspot. So tourists would actually purposely visit San Francisco to go to these edgier establishments. Gay people may not have been totally out at the time, but they were not completely hidden either. Katharine Hepburn never came out as bisexual or queer, but plenty of Hollywood insiders have confirmed that she did have many relationships with women. She was known for being an iconoclast. She preferred wearing pants rather than skirts. And you've probably actually seen copies of this photo of her, which were taken for Life magazine in 1938. In an April 1939 issue of Life, this photo was published with a really interesting caption. It reads, quote, "A man's suit of covert cloth made by a man's tailor is her favorite offstage outfit," end quote. The third photo in Lily's secret collection comes from Flying Magazine, an aviation magazine that still exists today. Lily's photo is from this July 1947 issue, which featured this article, "Two Gal Field, Ex-Wasps lease Long Island Airport and service and fly their own planes." This article tells us that Miss Lowell Wallace on the right, who is a flight mechanic, apparently once studied the violin. Miss Niles on the left, who is a flight instructor, is a former model. They met while serving as WASPs, which were considered a civilian unit for decades, even though these women flew military operations. They were not recognized as veterans until 1977 and were not even allowed to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery until 2016. So that is a brief introduction to Last Night at the Telegraph Club and some of the real-life historical examples that inspired it. I am so excited that the book is finally out, and I hope that you'll order a copy from your local bookstore or request it at your local library. If you're watching this the week of January 19th, 2021, I have a few time-sensitive things to tell you about. You can buy signed and personalized copies of the book at Porter Square Books at the link below. And please join me at a virtual event this week. I'm doing a few of them. On Saturday, January 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'm talking with author Meg Medina live on the Penguin Classroom Instagram account. On Sunday, January 24th at 2 p.m. Pacific, I'm talking with author Kristen Kishore at Mysterious Galaxy on Crowdcast, so that's online too. You can also order signed and personalized book plates from Mysterious Galaxy. And then on Wednesday, January 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern, I am talking with author Emily X.R. Pan at Porter Square Books, also on Crowdcast. So all this event information, including registration links, are on my website at malindalo.com/events. Thank you so much for joining me here for this virtual book launch. If you want to stay up to date on my news and events, sign up for my newsletter at loandbehold.substack.com. This spring, I will be writing a lot more about the historical research I did for this book on my newsletter, so if you thought this video was interesting, you will probably like the newsletter. You can also find me online at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all at Malinda Lo, Malindalo, so I invite you to follow me there. Last but not least, I really hope that you enjoy Last Night at the Telegraph Club. I loved writing it, and I am so happy that you can finally read it.